Hello and welcome. I am the keeper of this place we call the Candlelit Library. For years I have gathered stories that others misplaced. Accounts scribbled in brittle ledgers, murmured across telephone wires long since severed, or pressed like fading flowers between the pages of family Bibles no one opens anymore. They are not concerned with monsters that leap or scream. Rather, they dwell in a hush so deep it outlives their tellers. My recordings are made by candlelight and offered to you as a companion for the hour when your room falls quiet and the mind begins its gentle drift. Find a comfortable corner among the stacks, let the flame steady, and listen closely. Subscribe and let us begin. Have you ever heard a silence so old it seems to crumble when you breathe, the way ancient parchment flakes beneath an unwary thumb? It is not the absence of sound, but rather a sound with its bones removed, hollow, trembling, waiting to be filled by a memory that is no longer certain it belongs to you. I tasted that silence the first night I arrived at Glasmere Mill, and it has dusted the roof of my mouth ever since, fine as ground rye and just as bitter. I came to the mill for reasons that felt logical at the time. The university's special collections department needed an archivist willing to spend a month cataloguing the private papers of the Glasmere family, once famous millers, now footnotes in industrial folklore. A stipend, a roof, and solitude thick enough to muffle my own distracted heartbeat. I accepted before the ink on the offer could dry. The physician who signed my leave called it a curative retreat. I noticed his hand linger a moment too long over the various disclaimers, as though the ink itself worried him. The path to Glasmere is nothing more than a ribbon of dirt soaked in peat and evening fog. Even in daylight it feels like a hallway, narrowing the farther you walk, funneling you toward a single locked door you've already promised to open. The mill sits at the terminus of that path, 4 stories of soot-black stone swallowing what little sun leaks through the moorland weather. Though its wheel has not turned in 70 years, the air smells persistently of flour warmed against iron, sweet at first but with a faint metallic tang that gathers at the back of the throat like nosebleed and confession. The caretaker, Mr. Bryn, met me at dusk. A thin man, more lint than flesh, he spoke as though every word cost him a coin he'd rather hoard. He handed me one great iron key, turned once on his heel, and set off down the track before I could even thank him. His coat remained visible longer than he did. The moor took him in stages, buttons first, then collar, then the empty shape of a man who'd outlived all obligation. Inside, the mill was colder than the night beyond it. Each floor groaned under its own history, timbers swollen with the memories of wheat and labour and songs beaten into rhythm by the old water wheel. My lodgings, a modest room beside the disused grain chute, were perfectly adequate. Yet even there, behind a door I locked out of habit rather than necessity, the hush felt inhabited, as though someone was speaking behind the walls but not quite managing to form words. I set to work the next morning in the archive room, a loft overlooking what remained of the wheel pit. The boxes were unremarkable: invoices, family letters, a few sepia photographs of men in stiff collars staring off at something the lens would never show. But between each folder I found a handful of loose note cards, all in the same trembling hand, each bearing a single sentence: "The mill must sleep as we do. Water remembers the shape of its bed. The wheel turns even when the eye does not." At first I considered them the product of an elderly Glasmere descendant fading gently into symbolism, but the handwriting did not match any signature in the official papers, and the cards bore no dates. They felt, somehow, contemporary. Fresh ink sunk deeply into the fibres as though it had been pressed down with anxious deliberation. By the third night I began to hear the wheel, not the groan of wood on axle one might expect, but a much quieter repetition, like the slow breathing of someone standing just beyond a thin wall. An inhale of river that no longer flowed. An exhale of grain that had long since been baked into bread and consumed by mouths now long cold. At first I thought it a trick of wind, yet each time I held my breath to listen, the rhythm clarified. 6 steady beats, a pause, 6 more. I searched by lantern for an explanation. The wheel pit was empty, the sluice gate rusted shut. The watercourse outside lay choked with heather, more meadow than river. Still, the sound persisted, soft and careful, as if unwilling to be caught trespassing in the present. During the day, my work slowed. The archive rooms stank of spoiled paper and something older, like cellar stone after a flood. Every box I opened revealed new note cards. Do not strike the hopper after dusk. Meal sings in the dark. If the flower settles, wake it with your breath. I began to notice flour where there could be none. A pale film across my suitcase, a ghostly smudge on the glass chimney of my lamp. It appeared even on the inside of sealed folders, pooling at the creases as though sifted by an invisible hand. When I rubbed it between thumb and forefinger, it was colder than dust, almost damp, and carried the faint copper taste that had haunted the back of my tongue since arrival. On the seventh night, I dreamt of the mill as it once was, alive with water, belts, the endless hush thrum of millstones kissing grain. I stood at the base of the chute outside my room, while sacks of rye spilled upward, defying gravity, vanishing through the ceiling as though time had looped and forgotten its direction. A figure watched me from the landing, more suggestion than man, coat of flour, eyes like hollow knots in a pine board. When I woke, my boots were soaked through, though there had been no rain. I considered leaving. In truth, I began packing before dawn. Yet I could not shake the archivist's oath, to finish the record, to give memory a spine. Something in the silence asked me to stay, and I have never found it easy to refuse a well-phrased request, even one voiced only in absence. It was then I found the ledger, the only volume bound in rawhide rather than cloth. There were no dates, no headings, only 2 columns. On the left, quantities of grain. On the right, tally marks under a single repeating phrase, nights fed. The numbers did not correspond to production schedules or payroll. They read like rations, as though every stone of rye were an offering to something that ate in darkness and measured its hunger in evenings rather than pounds. The last entry was incomplete. Where the other lines displayed neat arithmetic, the final row ended abruptly in a violent downward score that tore through 3 pages beneath it. Beside that rip, in ink so fresh I smudged it with my thumb, someone had written, "The mill does not sleep." Pause long enough for a listener's heartbeat. That night, I refused to sleep inside the mill. Instead, I took a chair to the threshold where the water once ran, lit a candle and waited, both librarian and witness. Fog slid across the moor, snuffing moonlight like breath on glass. At some hour past reckoning, the wheel turned. I saw it, timbers dry as bone, rotating without sound, yet waking every beam in the building with a shiver, so deep I felt it in the enamel of my teeth. No river propelled it. It moved with the patience of a clock that has waited decades to remember its purpose. As it completed its first slow revolution, flour poured from the empty hopper above, drifting outward in a thin, relentless snowfall. Each mote turned the candlelight to blood-orange sparks before settling on my coat, my lashes, the open ledger on my lap. Where the flour touched the page, new words appeared, as though written by weight rather than ink. If you take note of us, you must also account. In that instant I understood. The mill did not want to be remembered. It wanted to be ongoing. Archiving its history was tantamount to burial, and burial was a language it would not accept. My cataloguing was a ritual of closing, and the building was determined to remain open-mouthed. Mr. Bryn reappeared as I locked the door behind me. He looked neither surprised nor curious, merely relieved. I offered the key, but he refused, palm flat to the rising sun. "Keep it," he murmured. "A place remembers whom it allows to leave. I have not returned to the university. The papers I carried with me dissolved in their folders within a week, as though doused in invisible rain. Yet sometimes when the house is quiet and I drift near sleep, a fine dust gathers on my tongue, cold, copper-sweet, patient. In those moments, I know the wheel is turning. Not violently, not greedily, but with the steady devotion of something that has learned the secret architecture of hunger. If ever you pass near Glasmere, you may be tempted by the promise of study, of salvage, of naming what should remain unnamed. Should you try the key, remember this. Some silences do not wish to be filled. They wish only for witnesses who understand that preservation and captivity are not the same thing. Thank you for listening. Should sleep find you now, may it settle lighter than flower upon your breath. Return to the Candlelit library anytime you seek the comfort of quiet dread. Until then, keep your candle lit, and do not wake what wishes only to turn in the dark.